Kentucky pulled out a win on Tuesday night over LSU, but Big Blue Nation is big mad about how things have been going in Lexington lately. Are we really at the point of having a legitimate conversation about John Calipari's job security?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host today, Isaac Shade. Joining me off the top here is the host of Locked On Kentucky, Mr. Lance Daw. We want to thank you for making this your first listen or watch every single day. Don't forget, we're free and available anywhere you get podcasts. Coming up later on today's show, North Carolina has received 2 top 30 commits in the class of 24 in the past week, vaulting them to the number 1 class currently. We will unpack both of those guys with Jason Jordan, our director of college basketball recruiting. But before we get to that, Lance, Kentucky survives on Tuesday night. They shouldn't have had to survive, but they did. 74-71 over LSU in Rupp, a place that I've been just once, but it was to see Taylor Swift.
Oh,
It's not wrong. I'm actually being very serious.
Oh, I respect it.
It was a gift for my wife's birthday one year. Despite the win, there's been more talk from Big Blue Nation than I ever remember about Coach Cal's place in Lexington. Bigger than the start to this year, it's been building. Let me just run through a couple quick numbers, and then I just want to see where you're at with it, what you're hearing, and where we go from here. 2021, the year after COVID canceled everything, obviously kind of a miserable year for the Wildcats, 9-16, 8-9 in the SEC. Last season, 26-7, 14-4, a very solid year, if unspectacular by Kentucky standards, but obviously the loss to St. Peter's taints things, and they didn't win the SEC regular season or conference title. This year, off to a 10-4 start, 1-1 in the SEC. Remains to be seen what will happen in terms of conference championships and things like that. The last Final Four was 2015. The last and only national championship under John Calipari is 2012. Notably, haven't won an NCAA tournament game since the quote-unquote lifetime 10-year contract was announced. And it certainly doesn't help that used the UCLA job to get that leverage. And now UCLA has done really well under Mick Cronin with, yikes, Johnny Juzang leading the way. All that to say, the fan base, Lance, is understandably frustrated. The question becomes, do the decision makers feel the same way as the fan base?
I think it's an interesting time to be a Kentucky fan right now because, Isaac, I started doing this show a little bit over a year ago, and I thought in March, whenever the loss to St. Peter's came, that this would kind of be water under the bridge, right? Eventually, things would start to kind of shape up. Things would return to form. I was very excited about this upcoming season, and I did not expect the collapse I think we've seen in this early season in big games to actually happen. We heard a lot of talk this offseason about change, about adjustments, about modernizing certain things on the floor, and we just haven't seen that. And so it's quickly started to shift from the tone in the fan base, from my perspective, from, oh, maybe it's a small minority, to, okay, now almost everyone is pointing out the flaws that are happening right now, both on and off the court for Kentucky. A big point of contention earlier this offseason was recruiting, and I was like, I think that's going to eventually come around. Kentucky has proven that they can do that. Coach Cal obviously went out and signed one of the best classes, if not the best class in next year's upcoming recruiting cycle. I think right now, based on what we've heard from the fan base, there are legitimate frustrations and there are legitimate concern. Now, does that mean that there is legitimate frustration and concern from the people in power? I think that's another question with a different answer. Right now, Kentucky is locked in seemingly to a lifetime contract, so to speak, with John Calipari. And you and I were talking just a little bit before we went on air. It feels like if Kentucky were to go that route, it would not necessarily be the wisest thing considering how much money they would have to pay to get rid of a national title winning coach. Now, something I will say here quickly, Isaac, it has been a decade since he has won that national title. And on top of that, what is Kentucky if not a team that consistently competes for national titles? They haven't won an NCAA tournament game, like you mentioned, in quite some time. I mean, at some point, you have to start asking the question, when do things change?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think you're right. Like I did the math a little bit ago, and if my number crunching is correct, if Kentucky was to buy out John Calipari after this season, they would owe him $39.75 million still. I mean, it's just dumb. And as you said, this recruiting class coming in is ballers. They are ballers. Not to mention, who knows what Kentucky will do in the transfer portal as they've continued to do. And so it just seems like it doesn't make any sense to really begin to have that conversation. But man, I don't think we're at a tipping point. As you said, I think the answer is different from the decision makers than it is the fan base. But the fan base is a lot of those people with a lot of those dollars that you would need if you were going to make any changes. So you don't want to head in a different direction than you're heading right now. That is certainly for sure.
And something I'll say right now, as far as the short term goes, I mean, I think it's very valid, the frustrations that we're seeing. I mean, obviously, with the issues with the offense in the half court, we've seen a lot of struggles so far this year with Kentucky in crunch time, just not really knowing what to do. I mean, you talked about that close win over LSU last night. I mean, just a brutal game there at the very end where you saw several possessions where Kentucky just literally did not have any movement. Had Jacob Toppin not made that corner three, we could be talking about a loss, and we could be continuing to talk about a directionless Kentucky that doesn't really seem to have a lot of confidence in itself. So the short term, I absolutely understand the frustration, and I'm right there with the front fan base. If you've been listening to my podcast for any sort of amount of time over the past couple of months, I've been right there. Now, again, I want to reiterate, it does not mean a coaching change has to happen at this moment, right? Things can be adjusted. And I honestly do think when you go back and watch that LSU game, you did see maybe Kentucky starting to maybe change some things and head in the right direction.
I agree. Up to the point of, when things kind of fell apart in the last couple minutes, I think they had built a 10-point lead. And I believe the commentators even said, I can't even remember who it was now, but even said, to me, this is the best I've seen Kentucky other than non-conference bye games and other than Louisville. And if that's so, like, you're moving in the right direction. And I would tend to agree with that. Like, there was cohesion. Things looked good. Maybe we're getting, Oscar Tshiebwe back to full form now, all of these kind of things. It was a good night for Severe Wheeler, shooting wise and things like that. If he can do that, watch out, folks. Here we go. Now, Lance, just so that we've done it, if and when we get to the point of saying it's time, John Calipari is deciding to walk away, or they've come up with and backed up a truck with the world's stupidest amount of money, who would be some of those people we would begin to look at?
Now, again, we're just we're just putting out a hypothetical here. This could be either 2 years from now, or it could be whenever Cal finally decides to hang it up a decade from now. We don't know how much longer John Calipari is going to be here, but Isaac, to kind of humor the conversation, I think there are two names that you have heard more than any others out there, and that would be Nate Oates, and that would be Jay Wright. Now, whether or not Jay Wright is interested in coming out of retirement to coach it for the Wildcats, I don't think that's reality there. But Nate Oates is somebody that I personally would be very excited about as Kentucky's new head coach, because he hits the two things you want. He's a good recruiter, and he's an X's and O's guy. You look at Alabama and the way they play the 5 out. I mean, that's the direction the game is headed over the past half decade, and it's what thrives. And right now, Alabama's the cream of the crop in the SEC. They've got some really talented 5-star freshmen that are producing. Guys like Brandon Miller. I mean, I think that he would be, as far as finding somebody to maybe replace and sustain the success that Cal had, I think he would definitely be a solid potential option. Outside of that, Isaac, I mean, this was a conversation that I had quite a bit on my show earlier this summer, is that with some of the fans that were really upset, I'm like, guys, who is going to replace John Calipari? I mean, is there a coach out there right now that fans and boosters and the athletic department collectively would be comfortable with? Yeah. Everybody's got to be okay with this next decision. It's got to be somebody that is worth their salt. And so I just don't know if there are a whole lot of names out there in college basketball right now that would leave their current job to go to Kentucky. But I will say this, I have no idea if he's interested in the job or not. But Nate Oates, I think, just looking at his resume and looking at what he's doing with the Crimson Tide right now, he would be a really, really good hire. I think a lot of people would be happy with him.
You know, it's funny. I hadn't even heard you have those conversations. He's literally the name on my notes at the top of my list. I love Nate Oates, and I think he would be massive. I think it would make sense to at least think about Mark Pope, bringing somebody back home.
Sure.
And then you can't not make a call to guys like Scott Drew and Mark Few, because it's the same thing that the North Carolina went through after Roy Williams retired. You got to make those dudes tell you no, who are at the highest level of the sport. And so a really interesting conversation, one that, as you've kind of alluded to, not outright said, but I'll say it, is premature, I think, in both of our estimations. I think for me that John Calipari, even though we're not at the top or the height of Kentucky success right now that the Wildcats and Big Blue Nation are used to seeing, but I believe that he has earned the right to walk away on his own terms, and his contract says as much, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And premature, I definitely think, is a good word for it. But again, just want to reiterate, look, there are several guys right now that I don't think would walk away from their job, but I think, to your point, Isaac, you can't just leave them alone. You definitely have to go and reach out to them. So if Kentucky does choose to move on, I would hope that the fan base would understand, regardless of who the hire is, that it would be made in the best interest of the program's future specifically, and the goal would be to get back to winning national titles. And so I certainly hope that they make that decision if they do choose to walk away from Calipari, or they force Calipari to resign, essentially. I hope that they're not making that decision lightly. I think it's very important that Kentucky times this right if they ever do it in the future. And I hope that the whole process is made very carefully.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we got this year and then 6 more years left on this lifetime contract, so we will continue to monitor it. But folks, I don't think we're anywhere near anything drastic happening in Lexington. Well, North Carolina got commitments from Elliot Cadeau and James Brown. Yes, that is his name. Coming up, we're going to talk with Jason Jordan about both of these men and what it means for North Carolina's 2024 recruiting class. But before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball, they've got it all. Make sure to check out the line for tomorrow night's Big 12 clash between TCU and Baylor. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your sports betting info. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college basketball recruiting sponsor across the Locked On network. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Jason Jordan, great to have you on the show here in the new year. And what we got to talk about is the North Carolina Tar Heels have the early lead in the class of 2024. I know we're still 18 months out or whatever it is, but right now the Tar Heels have 3 commitments and just secured 2 top 30 commitments within the past week to vault themselves into the number 1 spot in this recruiting cycle, getting true point guard Elliot Cadeau out of New Jersey, who plays in Branson, Missouri, and getting James Brown, no song jokes, please, sir, today, from the Chicago area. And so I want to unpack these guys one at a time. Let's start with Elliot Cadeau, a true point guard, the likes of which North Carolina has probably not seen since Kendall Marshall was in Chapel Hill.
Yeah. Ellie is definitely the best passer in the 24 class. And like Kendall, one of the best playmakers for sure. Definitely the best passer, one of the best playmakers, if not the best playmaker. But the thing that he has that Kendall didn't have was that athleticism. He has a 45-inch vertical. So, if you're not showing on that high screen, if you're not showing defensively, then it's going to be SportsCenter top 10. So he's shown that multiple times. But just a high IQ guy, pass first guy. I talked about this a couple times before. We did a story on him a few months back, and he told me about how his foundation is to be pass first. Like, he didn't even learn how to score when he was in middle school, starting to play, and younger, and he was averaging like 11 assists a game. And he thought, and then his people were like, "Yeah, man, you gotta you got to score too. He'd take like 2 shots a game, maybe 1 or 2 shots a game. Would never shoot because he was like, man, passing is great. And so, that's his foundation. He had to join a league, a less talented league, like in the junior high era, to just work on straight scoring, right? And so obviously that has now caught up because he can obviously score it really well. But just a guy, shifty, athletic, high IQ, makes the best pass, sees plays 2 to 3 plays ahead, always got the head on a swivel, but just always makes the right basketball play. And he's capable of the wild play as well. So huge gift for Hubert Davis for sure.
Man, that's so. And Jason, one of the things you look at his measurables, 6'1", 165. Is there any concern about being a little bit undersized? You think about North Carolina currently and RJ Davis. Sometimes, some of those defensive assignments can be a little difficult, or does that athleticism and vertical make up for it?
Yeah, I think that's that. I mean, he's 6 feet, but if you look at him, look at him stand beside Caleb Love. Like they're not like. You can just look at them stand beside each other and say, "Oh, how does this help Caleb?" Not at all, because you're still on an island if I'm in front of you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I'm still going by you. Not to single out Caleb, but because he's so aggressive, because he's such a physical downhill guard who not just most of those guys are looking to score, but he's a guy who's looking to get piece of the paint and pass and score because of his physicality and his athleticism. I don't think it makes a difference. Like, I think he'll be very, very productive at that position. The height, size, that's not going to hold him. It hasn't held him back with the top players in the country because he's dominated them. So
I think that's what we need to know, and that's what matters ultimately when he steps on the floor in Chapel Hill. Now, what, Jason, when a player of this caliber commits this early in a cycle, what does it signal to other players in the class of 24? Like, hey, I see a true playmaking point guard. I want to go be part of that. Can other players around the country point to that as something that might help influence their decision making?
Yeah, it makes North Carolina, who doesn't need any help, looking better. It makes them look a lot better. It makes them look like the shiny new toy. And so it's one thing to say, I mean, I think we're really, and coaches do this, man, I'm telling you, I think we're really close with Elliot Cadeau. And if we just get, and it's one thing to say that, and they're like, yeah, but he ain't committed, and I heard he's a Texas Tech fan growing up because he was. So it's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to say, Elliot, text this kid, and help us with that. I'm not even gonna tell what we got, but then here's Elliot like, oh, how did he get my number? Wow, Elliot Cadeau, Mr. One and Done more than likely wants me to come play with him. Yeah, that matters to a 16, 17-year-old. So yeah, I definitely that's a huge boost for North Carolina at that specific position because it's the most important position on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we've heard about potential with Elliott is that he might reclassify to the class of 23. He is already 18 years old, for those who are unaware. And so what are the things that come into play, Jason, with North Carolina and their roster in terms of Cadeau's decision to either reclass to 23 or to stay in 24?
I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to Caleb Love. If he's there, Elliott will not be. I think if he's gone, and I think he will be gone, I think Elliott will go ahead and take his chances at that spot. Now, I say take his chances because they have they're still going to have I think RJ Davis will still be there.
Okay.
Obviously, Seth Trimble will still be there. Those are two talented guys. Then there's DeMarco Dunn, but I think he's going to be more in a backup role. But I think Elliott would take his chances if Caleb is not there, because I think it's a good thing to have. But then, to your point, I mean, that would mean Simeon Wilcher. You got to contend with that. Now he's not running the point. He can, but
right.
I don't think he will.
No, that would be Cadeau's role.
All these guys there.
Yeah.
But I think they're probably going to have to run if that happens, and I think it's more likely that it will than it won't.
Interesting. Okay.
If that happens, they're probably going to have to run a 3-guard lineup. I mean,
Find the minutes. Yeah, you got to get all. Yeah.
Right, but they're gonna have to get on the floor often, early, and if you don't, he's gonna have to get real creative with those substitutions and minutes.
Yeah,
but it's a good problem.
Yeah, it seems like Hubert Davis might need to go spend some time in Waco, Texas this summer and learn a few things from Scott.
Yeah. Scott will tell him all he needs to know.
Now, if I'm a fan of one of these, if I'm tuning in and I'm a Kansas fan, Texas Tech, Texas, Louisville, Syracuse, who didn't get Elliot Cadeau, where do I turn next? What do I look for now that Elliot Cadeau is off the board in my class of 24?
Well, I mean, they have different irons in the fire, and so, and this isn't, coach, this isn't anything new to coaches.
Right,
I mean,
absolutely.
Texas Tech was strong with Elliott, so I think they would probably be like, but at the end, I think it was shifting, it was trending away, right? But they have multiple offers out there, and you really just turn it sounds wild because you've been on this kid for a year, but they really do just turn the page. Like I talked to a coach who didn't get a kid. This was in the last month, and he was just like, I said, well, how you? They were close. How you feeling about that? He's like, oh man, we had another call, a Zoom call today with this other kid, and we feel strongly about that. It's not where it used to be. Coaches would like, and they do, don't get me wrong, they're still human, they still catch feelings here and there,
right.
It's not like that to the degree that it used to be. It's usually, because now it's like it's more a business than it's
literally a business now. Yeah,
like it really is. So, and I've even had coaches tell me, hey man, I can't be mad at him. I can't be mad at him, man. I know they got this deal with this company, and they're collective. We can't compete with that collective. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, coaches turn the page pretty quickly.
Okay. You love to see that. Now, as we think about these North Carolina Tar Heels, who, as we've said, currently have the #1 class in 24, thanks in part to Elliot Cadeau, but thanks also to another commit who will be the very happy recipient of a lot of Elliot Cadeau passes, who committed to North Carolina right at the beginning of the new year, just less than a week after Cadeau, Mr. James Brown out of Chicago. He is a 6'9", 210 forward, plays at St. Rita in the Chicago area. Jason, as we look at this guy, North Carolina's got their backcourt guy. Now they've got a front court guy. What are we looking at with with James Brown for the North Carolina Tar Heels?
Well, just a highly effective, highly efficient center, right? So a guy who definitely is excited about his role, doesn't only accept his role, excited about his role, stays, and the role is to stay in the paint and be athletic and high energy, which is always, if you're at 6'9" with his length, if you are excited about being athletic, high energy, that's going to translate into production, just to make it simple, because I hate when people do all that technical stuff.
Yeah.
Because he's the guy you're not going to point to say, oh man, he does it, like he knocks down Steph Curry threes, or he doesn't have a specific thing that he does that is just dominant. He does a lot of things really well, and one of the things that he does, the thing that he does the best, is to bring his motor every time on both ends of the floor, and that turns into production for him. He played with Mean Streets this summer, averaged 11 and 6. I think he shot like 60, 65 from the field. So highly efficient, great hands, rim runner, guy who can start the break, but he's not a guy who is out there trying to be Kevin Garnett. I mean, Kevin Garnett too, but Kevin Durant.
Kevin Durant, yeah.
Know my age. Kevin Durant, he stays within himself, and himself is to be in the paint, impacting the game on both ends of the floor. And that excites him. And I think that's great. And unfortunately, that's rare, but that excites him. And I think that is going to translate with a guy like Elliot Cadeau. Oh man, it's gonna be Lob City. And he'll be, to your point, he'll be the recipient of a lot of great passes, because Elliott's a pass first guy. And I think, to your point, obviously that impacted James to see Elliott, the best passer in the class of 2024. It's like, oh, they got Elliott. Yeah, I'm ready.
I mean, let's do it. Yeah. Yeah. Wrap that up. Now, I think, as you've alluded to with the he's not Kevin Durant thing, we're not going to call him a point forward, but with James Brown, he does have some ball handling skills, the ability to get out and run and transition, get it back, dunk. How, like, obviously with the great backcourt players that North Carolina has, he's going to be told, James, you run to the front of the rim and you wait, right? Like, but how helpful is it to have somebody who can handle the ball a little bit in transition if necessary as a 6'9" big?
Oh, it's huge, and he'll reap a lot of the benefits of just being agile and just being a rim runner. With that lineup, let's say potentially the lineup is R.J. Davis, Elliot Cadeau, and Simeon, geez, and Simeon Wilcher, or Seth Trimble, who I'm very much a fan of. That's going to produce a high octane offense where there's going to be a lot of transition. Have we ever heard about that in North Carolina? But, it'll be like old school North Carolina and new school, because they still do that now. But he'll be having that skill set will absolutely make him more productive in that specific lineup.
Yeah.
And it'll make the team more productive. And so, but again, he's not a guy he can do that, but you watch him play in a game, he's not out there on the wing and the perimeter. Right. He's down there getting,
come meet me in the paint. Let's go to work. Yeah.
He communes there.
One of the other things that's important about James Brown's game is his ambidexterity. And man, so many of these kids, it's like, I'm working on that left. We'll get there. But with Brown, it seems like it is something that is a legitimate part of his game. How difficult is it, or how much more difficult is it for a post player to defend someone who's legitimately able to finish well with either hand?
Yeah, I've seen him frustrate opposing teams in the summer because he's really just as good with both hands. So it's like I remember a game where I don't even remember who the kid was, but they were playing I think it might have been in Indy or something like that. But I remember the kid being like, what do you want me to do? As the coach is on him, like, front him, get behind him. And it's like, he's finishing with both. And in the span of 4 minutes, he finished with the left and the right on, short jump hooks. And the kid, he was just frustrating the other kid, and the opposing coach was just going crazy. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's just like a microcosm of, what he's capable. And it is frustrating to have to contend with a guy who can finish with both hands. And that is something that is going to be a superpower for him as he continues to develop it.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. And then, Jason, I just want to finish by asking about the actual recruitment itself, because Chicagoland is not an area that the North Carolina Tar Heels are typically known to go into and pull out of. So in this one, they're going up against the likes of Notre Dame and Michigan State and Illinois. What are a couple of the main reasons why Chapel Hill is a desirable place for James Brown to play his college career?
Well, I think it does, a lot of it has to do with personnel and who's going to be there when he's there. And then opportunity, I think he feels like when he gets there, it'll be a, time for him to step right in and be able to produce and do what he does right away. And then at the end of the day, don't get it twisted, it's North Carolina. I don't know who needs to hear that. But, don't be confused. I can tell you, I talk to these top 10 kids all the time, and, it's while most of them tend to be Hollywood, and I don't mean that as a knock. It's the nature of the beast.
Sure.
They are always very excited about a Hubert Davis text, and so when you ask them if they haven't gotten the offer from North Carolina, let's just use North Carolina. It's almost like, I really want that North Carolina offer. Like I want first right of refusal, or if I don't, I want the option because I want to go on that visit. That kind of stuff. So, I don't, North Carolina hasn't gotten like 3 top 10 players and as like other blue bloods, but don't be confused. And again, we say it comes in cycles, Duke's been on a long cycle. Kentucky's they've been on cycles, but I mean, they're number one right now, and they got players that, Elliot Cadeau is going to be. He's always going to be, top 5, top 8, right? But James is going to continue to rise, so he could be in the top 15, top 10.
Great point.
With a logical progression.
Yeah.
So, it could be their cycle. I mean, right now they're number one, and that's not going to change. I think they will end up having 2 top 15 to 20 players
when it's all said and done.
When it's all said and done. So it could be their cycle. Time will tell. But,
sure.
It's always a good indicator when you're number one in the class.
It's not a bad thing to have for
Not
sure.
terrible. Yeah.
Well, Jason Jordan, thank you as always for joining us here on Locked On College Basketball to unpack these 2 recent top 30 commits to North Carolina. Folks, make sure you're always dialed in to when we have our guy Jason Jordan on. He always brings great stuff about the recruiting game and what's going on all around the nation in college basketball recruiting. Jason, thanks as always for joining us.
Absolutely.
That's it for today's episode of Locked On College Basketball. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to make your next listen Locked On Sports Today. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and of course, the take of the day. It's available on Odyssey, YouTube, and anywhere else you get podcasts. Locked On Sports Today. Folks, please make sure to subscribe to the show, like, and comment on it. Coming up tomorrow, our guy Andy Patton will be back, as will Leaf Tulane, who's always with us on Thursdays, unpacking a little bit of the news of potential March Madness expansion. Hope you have a great day. Can't wait to talk to you tomorrow. But until then, peace.